My name is Ronald Fraser. I turned 81 this past January, and I have lived in the same narrow, weather-worn house on the east side of Savannah, Georgia, for over 50 years. This house has seen all the seasons of my life: youth, marriage, fatherhood, retirement, and now what I can only describe as my slow, invisible unraveling. The paint has faded, the porch leans slightly to the right, and the screen door moans when the wind presses against it. But it's mine. It smells of old books, cedar wood, and faintly still of my late wife's rose-water perfume. I keep the kitchen spotless, although I barely cook more than eggs and toast. The only rooms I use now are the kitchen, the downstairs bathroom, and the sunlit armchair in the living room where I sit every morning, clutching the newspaper as if it still mattered. I was a history teacher for 42 years, high school mostly, though I did some substitute work at the community college after retirement. I never made much money, but I took pride in what I did. I never saw myself as just a teacher. I was a storyteller, a keeper of truths, someone who tried to show young people how time could teach us something if we listened. They don't listen anymore. Nobody does. The world now is loud and fast and always looking away. My daughter says I'm just being dramatic when I say this, that I romanticize the past. But I remember when people had time to sit on porches and just talk. My wife, Helen, passed 8 years ago in her sleep. A heart attack. She went quietly, without fuss, just like she lived. We were married for 49 years. She was the one who kept the Christmas boxes organized, remembered the birthdays of my students, made our home more than just shelter. After she died, something in this house grew quieter than silence. It became hollow. I still keep her nightgown hanging on the back of the bathroom door. I suppose I should have taken it down long ago, but sometimes I touch the sleeve before bed. Her warmth isn't in it anymore, but the shape remains. We had only one child, Christine. She was our pride for many years, and I'll be the first to admit that we spoiled her. Not with money, because we never had much, but with attention, with time, with effort. Helen would sew her dresses, I would quiz her with flashcards. We both would sit through every violin recital, every spelling bee. I used to believe, perhaps naively, that children grow up to return what you gave them, if not in kind, then at least in spirit. I don't believe that anymore. Christine lives in Atlanta now, married to a man named Scott, whom I never much cared for. He sells insurance or investment portfolios. I forget which, because he changes jobs every 2 years and still manages to act as though he's the most successful man in any room. They have a son, Mark, and a daughter, Emily, both in college now, both strangers to me in the most painful sense of that word. I used to write them letters, long, handwritten notes filled with stories from my youth, little newspaper clippings I thought they might find amusing or useful, old photographs with names written on the back in pencil. I never received a reply. Not once. Christine told me it's just the way kids are now, that they communicate differently. But I know indifference when I feel it. I used to call them, leaving messages that began cheerfully and ended in quiet shame. Eventually I stopped calling. You can only knock on a door for so long before you start to wonder if you're the one trespassing. Christine visits twice a year, Thanksgiving and sometimes Easter, if they're not vacationing. She arrives in a cloud of expensive perfume, bringing store-bought pie and plastic smile conversation. The visits last 3 hours, never more, and always follow the same script. How's the house? Are you eating okay? Have you thought more about assisted living? I nod. I smile. I say thank you. Then she leaves, and the silence that follows is deeper than before. I have no illusions. I know she's waiting for me to die. I see it in the way she scans the property, in the way she talks about the real estate market, in how quickly she changes the subject when I bring up repairs or long-term care insurance. She thinks I don't notice. But I do. The truth is, I've started to fade. Not from memory, but from relevance. And I think that's the cruelest part of aging. The world doesn't mourn your passing when you're gone. It forgets you while you're still here. You become a relic, something people dust off and smile at, but never take seriously. I've gone entire days without speaking to another soul. Sometimes the only voice I hear is from the television or the radio. There's a man on the AM station who still reads the news slowly, the way I like. I keep it on most days, just to feel less alone. I have enough money to live comfortably thanks to Helen's pension and my savings. I've made arrangements for my care should things worsen. I've even prepared my will, though I haven't told Christine about the changes. That will come in time. I've tried to live a quiet, honourable life. I've paid my taxes, kept my promises, and asked for little. And yet somehow I find myself nearing the end of my days, not with a sense of peace, but with the heavy ache of knowing I no longer matter to the people I once loved the most. Still, I rise each day, make my bed, brew my coffee, and read the paper, because ritual is what gives a life structure when everything else falls away. I watch the birds gather at the feeder I built 20 years ago, see the squirrels steal from them, and I chuckle because some battles never change. I write a page in my journal every night, even if it's just to say the weather was cold or that my knees ached more than usual. That too is a way of saying, I was here, I am still here, and I have not said my final word. Thanksgiving had always been Helen's favourite holiday, even more than Christmas. She used to say it was the only one that didn't ask for anything but your presence and your appetite. A day built on the idea that just being together was enough. For decades, she would wake at 5 a.m. to begin the preparations, rolling out pie crusts, basting the turkey, humming softly to herself as the smell of cinnamon and roasted vegetables filled every corner of the house. After she passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive for a couple of years, but the silence in the kitchen was too loud, and the way the sunlight hit the empty chair at the dining table made it impossible to ignore the shape of her absence. Eventually, I settled for reheated meals and memories. This year, to my surprise, Christine called me 3 days before the holiday. Not just a quick message or a text from her husband's phone, but an actual call. She asked if they could come down for Thanksgiving dinner. The kids have a long weekend, she said, her voice clipped and efficient, and Scott's work trip was cancelled. I tried not to let the shock show in my tone. I told her, of course, I'd love that, and that I'd make the sweet potato casserole Helen used to make, the one with the little marshmallows on top. She paused a beat too long before saying, "Sure, that's fine," as if indulging a harmless eccentricity. I spent the next 2 days shopping, cleaning, and setting the table just as Helen would have wanted it. I even polished the silverware and laid out the linen napkins that hadn't seen daylight in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had a sense of anticipation, however cautious. They arrived late, as usual. Christine came in first, wearing a beige coat too thin for November, and holding a tray from some upscale bakery. Scott followed behind, juggling his phone and a Bluetooth headset, speaking to someone about quarterly figures and last-mile logistics, as if the world couldn't possibly turn without him. Mark and Emily trailed in last, eyes glued to their phones, earbuds in, murmuring occasional acknowledgements that passed for greetings. I tried to hug them both, but it felt like I was trying to embrace smoke. Dinner was tense in the way only family dinners can be. Christine kept adjusting the volume on the music I'd put on, complaining that old jazz made her feel sleepy. Emily pushed the stuffing around her plate, declaring she'd gone vegan since last semester. Mark asked if there was Wi-Fi. I did my best to keep the conversation afloat, asking about their classes, their plans, their favourite professors, but each answer was shorter than the last. Scott eventually retreated to the couch with a beer, flipping channels on the muted television. I remember thinking that this would be the last Thanksgiving I hosted, not because I didn't want to, but because it was too painful to try and build warmth in a room gone cold. It was after dessert, store-bought pumpkin pie and my lopsided casserole, that had happened. I was recounting a story from my first year teaching, something light-hearted about a student who had tried to plagiarize an essay using a speech from To Kill a Mockingbird. I'd told this story before, of course, maybe even twice, but it always made Helen laugh, and for a brief moment I wanted to feel that sound in the room again, even if just in my memory. Christine interrupted me mid-sentence. "Dad," she said, her fork still in her hand, her voice sharper than the metal. "You've already told that story. Multiple times." The room went quiet. "We get it. You were a teacher. You had clever students. But maybe it's time to let it go. I mean..." She gave a quick laugh that no one joined. "You're kind of past the age where those things matter anymore." I froze. I felt my throat close up, and my hands trembled just slightly against the tablecloth. For a moment I thought I had misheard her, or that perhaps she was joking in that dry, sarcastic tone she sometimes used in high school. But then I saw Scott smirk into his beer bottle and Emily roll her eyes, and I knew she meant it. Not just the story, but everything. My life, my memories, my voice. They were all, in her view, things to be tolerated at best, gently pushed aside like dusty furniture from another era. Too old to matter. I tried to diffuse it, to smile and make a self-deprecating joke about the indignities of aging, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, and my chest ached in that way it does when something you thought was safe suddenly cracks. Christine had already moved on, checking her phone, asking Emily if she wanted to leave soon to beat traffic. No one noticed I hadn't touched my coffee. No one asked if I was okay. Later that night, after they left with air kisses and leftover containers they hadn't asked for, I sat alone in the kitchen with the lights off. I didn't clear the plates. I didn't wash the silverware. I just sat there, listening to the quiet tick of the wall clock Helen had picked out in 1974, and I replayed Christine's words over and over again. Too old to matter. Not even said in anger, but in off-handed dismissal, the way one might mention that a car is no longer under warranty. A fact, not a feeling. Something shifted in me that night. I don't think she noticed, and I doubt she would have cared if she had, but I knew that a line had been crossed, not with cruelty, but with carelessness. And in some ways, that was worse. You expect cruelty from strangers. From your daughter, you expect recognition. From your daughter, you hope to still matter. Even a little. Even now. I went to bed without brushing my teeth, something I hadn't done since Helen died. And when I closed my eyes, it wasn't sleep that came, but a heavy, aching clarity that I had been clinging to the wrong hopes for far too long. After Thanksgiving, Christine didn't call for 3 weeks. Not that I expected her to. In the past few years, that had become our rhythm, brief appearances followed by long silences. But this time, something felt different. Something in her tone at the dinner table, in the easy way she had brushed me aside, had settled into my bones like damp air. I kept replaying her words in my mind, not because they were cruel, but because they were indifferent, and indifference from your own child is a much colder thing than anger. I went about my days as usual, making coffee, reading the paper, taking walks to the corner store for milk or bread I didn't really need, trying to shake the feeling that I had somehow become obsolete in the life of the only family I had left. Then, on a grey Wednesday morning, my phone rang. It was Christine. Her voice was bright, too bright, the kind of forced cheer that immediately makes you brace for something unpleasant. "Hi, Dad," she said, drawing out the words like she was trying to convince herself they belonged. How are you doing? Everything okay with the house? I told her everything was fine, that the gutters needed clearing, but I'd get around to it. She made a sound of disapproval. You really shouldn't be climbing ladders at your age. We've talked about that. I bit my tongue. Actually, she continued, I wanted to talk to you about something a little more long-term. The pause before those last two words was deliberate, careful, and immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Scott and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you living alone in that big house. It's a lot to manage. The stairs, the maintenance, the yard. We just think maybe it's time to start looking into other options. Assisted living, maybe. Or even just selling the place and moving somewhere more manageable. I stayed silent. I could feel my fingers tightening around the armrest of my chair. She mistook my silence for confusion. Dad, I'm not saying you have to move tomorrow. Just start thinking about it. There are some really lovely communities near Atlanta. You'd have people your age around, activities, medical support. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. Her voice softened, as if I were already halfway gone, as if I were being gently coaxed toward an exit I hadn't asked for. It's not just about safety, Dad. It's about your quality of life. You shouldn't have to struggle. Struggle. That word echoed louder than anything else. She had no idea what I struggled with, and it wasn't the stairs or the lawn or the occasional creak in my knees. It was the silence. It was the way her voice changed when she talked to me now, like she was performing compassion rather than feeling it. I told her I'd think about it. She seemed relieved. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. Maybe after the holidays, we can start looking at some options together. We hung up soon after. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the faded wallpaper that Helen had insisted we never replace, feeling the contours of my life begin to constrict, as if someone had started measuring me for a smaller box. A week later, I received a packet in the mail. It was a glossy brochure for a retirement lifestyle community near Marietta, complete with photographs of smiling seniors playing pickleball and holding wine glasses at sunset. Tucked inside was a sticky note in Christine's handwriting. Just some ideas. No pressure. Love, C. I placed the packet on the kitchen counter and didn't open it again. But the message was clear. The clock had started ticking, and the countdown wasn't to a birthday or a family event, but to the end of my autonomy. I didn't sleep much that night. Or the next. The following month, my property tax bill arrived, and I noticed something strange. The envelope was addressed to both me and Christine, something that had never happened before. I called the county office and was told that a secondary authorized party had been added to my account, with permission to access and manage property-related correspondence. When I asked who had made that request, they read Christine's name back to me. I hung up and sat down at the kitchen table, my heart pounding. The change wasn't illegal, but it wasn't innocent either. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't even mentioned it. She had simply taken a step closer toward taking control. Then came the bank calls. One morning, I got a voicemail from my financial advisor asking to confirm a recent conversation he'd had with Christine about my retirement accounts. I called him back immediately. She said she was helping you with some paperwork, he said, sounding puzzled. Wanted to know about distribution options, beneficiaries, that sort of thing. I didn't give her anything, of course. I told her I'd need your written permission. I thanked him, hung up, and felt the nausea rise in my chest. Christine wasn't waiting for me to agree to anything. She was already moving pieces in the background, as if I were a chessboard she could rearrange at will. A few days later, I noticed a subtle but chilling development. I received a notice from the utility company stating that my billing account had been linked to a new online management portal, one I had not set up. I called the number on the notice, and after a long wait and several transfers, I was told the new user had the same email address I knew Christine used for her work. She said she was your caretaker. The customer service rep said. Wanted to make sure everything was paid on time. I thanked her and ended the call, gripping the phone so tightly my hand began to ache. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the comforting hum of the old refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards under my slippers, and realized that my daughter had begun to erase me, quietly, efficiently, behind a mask of concern, not out of malice, perhaps, but out of that cold utilitarianism that so often masquerades as responsibility. She saw me not as a father, not even as a person, but as a problem to be managed, a financial account, a real estate parcel, an aging liability. Her gestures of kindness, calling, sending brochures, linking utility accounts, were not acts of love, but moves on a long, slow path toward taking everything I had built for myself and for Helen. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling her and demanding an explanation, but I knew how that would go. She would sigh, tell me I was being paranoid, that she was only trying to help. And perhaps she believed that. Perhaps in her mind I was no longer capable of understanding what was best for me. That was the part that cut the deepest. The idea that my thoughts no longer counted, that my voice no longer carried weight. It wasn't just that she was taking control, it was that she believed she had the right to. Not later. Not when I was gone, but now. And so I began to do something I hadn't done in years. I began to take notes. I wrote down every change I noticed, every unauthorized login, every phone call she made on my behalf. I contacted my bank and removed all third-party access. I changed the locks on my doors and told no one. I reread my will, and then I began to write a new one that would speak clearly, even if I no longer could, because something inside me had woken up, not out of fear, but out of a long dormant instinct to preserve what dignity I had left. I had no illusions about where this road was heading. Christine saw me as a fading signature on a document. I intended to make that signature count before it was erased completely. It was mid-January when Christine arrived unannounced. I was sitting by the window in my living room, the kind of afternoon where the light had that soft, tired grayness to it, and the air inside the house felt thick with silence. I saw her car pull into the driveway, silver, spotless, and unfamiliar. She stepped out wearing a tailored coat and sunglasses, holding a leather folder under one arm, the way someone might when walking into a meeting they already planned to dominate. There had been no phone call, no warning, just the sudden sound of tires on gravel and a knock at the door that came not with warmth, but with intention. When I opened it, she gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Hi, Dad. Mind if I come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside and let her in, already feeling the shift in temperature, not from the January wind, but from the quiet authority in her tone. She walked into the living room without waiting for an invitation, as if the house already belonged to her. She looked around, made a sound of distaste when she saw the pile of unopened mail on the side table, and said, "We've got to start streamlining things around here. It's just too much for you." I followed her in, heart pounding slightly, not from exertion, but from a creeping awareness that this visit wasn't about catching up. She sat down on the edge of the armchair across from mine, opened the folder, and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are just some preliminary forms," she said, her voice calm and practiced. "Nothing final, just things to think about." I didn't respond. I looked at the papers. I saw words like durable power of attorney, medical proxy, property consolidation. I saw my name in small print on line after line, and I saw hers in large, bold letters next to the words authorized agent. My stomach turned, not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. She kept talking, explaining things in that soft, patient tone you use with someone you believe is slowly slipping into irrelevance. "If something were to happen, it would just make things so much easier," she said, flipping a page. "You wouldn't have to worry about bills or hospital decisions or the mortgage. I could handle everything. You could just rest." I interrupted her there. "The mortgage?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Well, I mean the property, the taxes, the expenses, it's all tied together. It's a burden for you. You shouldn't be managing these things at your age." She handed me a pen. Not a request, a gesture of expectation. I didn't take it. I just sat there, staring at the stack of paper that represented not care, but control. That folder wasn't protection. It was a transaction. It was the formalization of a slow erasure I had already felt in my bones for months. "Christine," I said slowly, my voice lower than usual. "Do you really believe I'm incapable of handling my life?" She didn't answer right away. She gave a little sigh, adjusted her sleeve, and said, "It's not about capability, Dad. It's about reality. You forget things. You leave the stove on. You don't answer your phone. I worry about you. This is how I protect you." That was the moment it all clicked into place. The calls to the bank, the changes to the utility accounts, the whispered suggestions of assisted living. It had never been about my well-being. It was about preparation, positioning, claiming territory before it was contested. And now, here it was, presented with a neat stack of legalese and a smooth-talking smile that almost sounded like love. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen under the pretense of needing water. I gripped the edge of the sink and tried to keep my hands from shaking. The house that Helen and I had spent a lifetime building had become a target, not for burglars, but for our own daughter, whose idea of family now resembled a spreadsheet. I came back to the living room and sat down without a word. She was watching me carefully, calculating. "I need time," I said. She nodded as if she expected resistance, as if it was a known variable in her plan. "Of course," she said, gathering the papers and tucking them back into the folder. "Just don't take too long. Things happen, and it's better to be prepared." She left shortly after, saying she had a flight back in the evening and couldn't stay. She kissed me on the cheek, called me Daddy, and promised to call in a few days. When she was gone, the silence in the house changed. It no longer felt like mourning. It felt like siege. That night, I opened my desk drawer and took out the will I had written years ago. I read through it slowly, noting how much had changed, names, amounts, relationships. I picked up a pen, crossed out Christine's name, and wrote something new at the bottom. To be reviewed and revised. It was not just a legal correction, it was a declaration. I wasn't ready to be boxed up and filed away. Not by her. Not yet. Over the next several weeks, Christine's efforts became bolder, more invasive, and unmistakably strategic. What had begun as subtle manipulation now revealed itself as a full-fledged campaign, a quiet, methodical operation meant to remove me from the center of my own life. She called almost daily now, always under the pretense of concern, always with a practiced softness in her voice that had once felt like affection, but now landed like the chill of a nurse's stethoscope on bare skin. She began asking strange, oddly specific questions. "Have you remembered to refill your blood pressure medication? Did you lock the front door last night? Are you still using candles when the lights flicker?" Questions not born of curiosity, but clearly rehearsed, framed to document a case, to build a picture not of a man, but of a liability. I sensed the gathering momentum of something dangerous, something already half-formed in her mind, and only waiting for paperwork to make it official. Then came the visit from the woman in the navy blue pantsuit with a clipboard. I had not scheduled any appointments, yet there she was, one afternoon, standing on my porch with a forced smile and a badge that read, Elder Wellness Outreach Coordinator. She said she was part of a state-funded initiative to check in on senior citizens, just a routine home visit, nothing formal. I asked if Christine had contacted her, and she gave a practiced laugh, pretending not to know who I meant, before saying, Sometimes family members do reach out proactively. It's always better to be safe, you know. She asked to come inside. I hesitated for a moment, then relented, partly out of curiosity, partly to avoid giving her more ammunition by seeming combative. She walked through my home slowly, noting the lack of grab bars in the bathroom, the pile of magazines near the stairwell, the absence of any visible medical devices. She asked if I lived alone, how often I left the house, whether I had any recent falls or episodes of confusion. I told her no to all of it, which was the truth, but she wrote things down anyway. She asked about my meals, my medications, my finances. I told her I cooked for myself, managed my own prescriptions, and paid my bills on time. She smiled but didn't stop writing. The pen moved across the paper with the cold confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome before asking the first question. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her speak into her phone as she walked down the driveway. Her voice was too low to hear, but her posture said everything. She wasn't reporting a visit, she was reporting progress. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long it would be before someone knocked again. This time, not with questions, but with orders. I began calling around the next morning. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a former colleague from my teaching days. His name was Malcolm Shaw, and he was in his late 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and the kind of sharp, probing questions that let me know he didn't waste time. I told him everything, about the folder of forms Christine had brought, the changes to my utility accounts, the surprise visits, the sudden urgency in her voice. He didn't seem surprised. We're seeing more of this, he said bluntly. It's called strategic incapacity positioning. Families collect just enough documentation to claim you're no longer fit to make decisions, then petition for guardianship. Once that's granted, you lose control of your assets, your home, your medical choices, everything. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Do you have a will? I nodded. Then let's update it, and let's make sure your powers of attorney are locked down tight. We'll also add a clause, irrevocable and notarized, stating your wishes regarding guardianship. If it comes to a legal battle, we'll have a trail. He paused, then asked gently, Do you want to remove your daughter from your estate? I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, at the veins and the spots and the tremor that came when I was too tired. I thought about the bedtime stories I had read her, the birthday cakes Helen had made, the long drives to ballet recitals and spelling bees. I thought about how she used to hold my hand with fierce conviction when she was 5, and how that same hand had signed forms to siphon my life away. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady. Remove her! We spent the next few weeks rebuilding the legal architecture of my life. Malcolm moved quickly, efficiently. I signed new documents, updated my will, reassigned beneficiaries, and placed everything in a secure file. He recommended a financial consultant who audited my accounts and flagged several irregularities, small, unexplained withdrawals, recurring payments to services I never used, a credit card opened in my name that I had no knowledge of, all linked back to Christine. My chest tightened with a mix of fury and shame. I had always imagined that betrayal would come with shouting, with slammed doors, with some final confrontation. But in reality, it came with passwords quietly changed, names added to bills, Subtle whispers passed behind closed doors. Then, as if to confirm that my instincts had been right all along, I received a letter. It was from a law firm in Atlanta, bearing Christine's return address. Inside was a formal petition, not yet filed but drafted, requesting emergency guardianship on the basis of increasing cognitive decline, poor financial judgment, and concern for personal safety. I read the letter 3 times before I set it down. My breath came shallow. She had gone further than I thought. This wasn't positioning anymore, it was attack. She was planning to declare me incompetent, take control of everything, and place me wherever she saw fit. I called Malcolm immediately. He came over that afternoon, and we sat at my dining table for nearly 2 hours, going over every angle. "She doesn't have medical proof," he said. "No diagnosis, no doctor's report. They'll need that in court." I nodded, my mind already racing. "Then I want to get evaluated. By professionals, independent ones." He agreed. Within a week, I had appointments with a gerontologist, a neurologist, and a psychiatrist. Each exam was long, invasive, and exhausting, but I answered every question. I completed every test. I recited lists backwards, copied shapes, solved math problems in my head, described proverbs, and interpreted metaphors. I even laughed at one point, realizing I was performing for strangers just to prove I still deserved ownership of my own mind. When the reports came in, they were unanimous. I was of sound mind and full cognitive capacity. Malcolm filed them immediately into a protective legal packet, along with the new will, the amended powers of attorney, and a formal cease and desist letter to Christine's attorney. We sent it registered mail. The silence that followed lasted almost a month. No phone calls, no visits, no letters. Then, one morning, as I was returning from the grocery store, I found her standing in my driveway. She looked thinner, tired, but still carried that rigid posture of self-righteousness. "Can we talk?" she asked, and before I could answer, she was already walking toward the porch. I followed her inside, and we sat in the living room, surrounded by framed photographs she hadn't asked about in years. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said, "You blindsided me." I said nothing. "Do you know how humiliating it was to be told that my father had hired a lawyer behind my back?" Again I stayed silent. She looked at me then, really looked, and her voice changed. "I was just trying to help." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You were trying to manage, to control, to claim. Help would have meant visiting, listening, asking what I needed. You decided what was best for me, without me. That's not love, Christine. That's control dressed up in concern." Her eyes narrowed. "So this is how it's going to be? You're cutting me out?" I shook my head. "You did that yourself. I'm just acknowledging it." She stood abruptly. "You'll regret this," she said. "When you're sick or dying or confused, you'll wish someone was there to take care of you." I met her gaze. I'd rather be alone than owned. She left without saying goodbye. The door closed with the soft finality of a chapter ending, not in anger, but in revelation. I stood in the living room and realized I was not afraid. Not anymore. I had reclaimed something that had been slipping away for years. Not just my autonomy, but my voice, my right to matter, even in the final seasons of my life. Christine had not expected resistance. She had expected surrender. And what she found instead was an old man unwilling to vanish quietly. It was early spring when the real confrontation unfolded, not in a courtroom or with a judge's gavel, but in the most banal of places. The dining room of a lawyer's office, with beige walls, cheap art prints, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. Christine had finally responded through her legal counsel, requesting a formal family discussion regarding the estate, to avoid public entanglement and distress. I knew what it was. A last-ditch effort to reclaim control before the paper trail I had built became irreversible. She wanted a seat at the table one more time before the table was pulled from under her. Malcolm advised me to go. He said if she was willing to meet, she was worried, and that meant leverage. So I agreed, on the condition that the meeting be recorded and that my witness, Malcolm, be present. She came alone, surprisingly, without Scott, without her attorney. That, more than anything, told me she had no real plan. Her confidence was brittle, and behind it was fear, not for my well-being, but for what she might lose. She was already seated when I arrived, and she didn't look up right away. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she wore a dark green blouse that made her look smaller than I remembered. There were lines around her mouth I hadn't noticed before, and a tension in her posture that made it clear she hadn't slept well. Malcolm and I sat opposite her, and he began the meeting with formality, reading a prepared statement confirming that all present parties had agreed to record the discussion and that this was a voluntary conversation regarding private estate matters. She nodded, murmured, "Yes," and then turned her eyes to me. They were not soft, not angry either. They were desperate, the way someone might look at a dam just before it bursts. "Dad," she began, her voice steady but clipped. "I want to start by saying that I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did. I made some decisions, yes, but they were out of concern, not greed. I've been trying to make sure you're taken care of, that things are handled, because you won't be around forever, and I didn't want to be left with chaos." She paused, looking for sympathy. "When Mom died, I saw how disorganized everything was. It scared me. I didn't want to go through that again." I didn't respond. I let the silence sit between us like fog. "But this," she continued, gesturing vaguely at the folder on the table, "this wall you've built between us, it's not right. You're my father. I've been trying to do the responsible thing." Malcolm cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table the way I had done during so many parent-teacher conferences over the years, when I needed to deliver a hard truth gently. "Christine," I said, "responsibility does not mean domination. You've made decisions about my life without including me. You've taken liberties with my finances, my property, my name. You initiated guardianship proceedings behind my back. You set wheels in motion that would have stripped me of every right I still hold, and you did it with the arrogance of someone who assumed I wouldn't fight back. You didn't act out of love. You acted out of calculation." Her lips tightened, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She wasn't here for remorse. She was here to bargain. "I was trying to protect you," she repeated, quieter this time. "From what?" I asked. "From myself? From my own mind? You tried to build a case that I was incapable, that I was confused, that I had become a burden. And you did it while smiling at me over dinner, while sending me brochures for lifestyle communities, while hugging me at the door and calling me Daddy. Do you know how that feels? To be managed like an asset instead of treated like a man?" Her expression hardened then, and I saw the mask fall. "You've always been impossible to talk to," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. "Always stubborn, always acting like the victim. Maybe if you'd let me help you sooner, this wouldn't have been necessary." And there it was, the core of it. She believed that resistance was weakness, that my refusal to surrender was an irrational act, something that made her role harder, less convenient. I realized then that she didn't see me as cruel or broken. She saw me as outdated, inefficient, a remnant of a generation that still wrote checks and paid bills in person, and believed that love wasn't something to be streamlined. I turned to Malcolm, who slid the folder across the table. Inside was a revised copy of my will, notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. I had brought it not to threaten her, but to confirm that the outcome was already sealed. "I've made my decisions," I said, "and I won't change them. You're not listed as a beneficiary. You've been removed from all legal authority over my affairs. My estate has been placed in a trust, administered independently. You will receive nothing." She went pale. For a moment, I saw the child in her again. The little girl who used to cry when she dropped her ice cream. The teenager who used to slam her door and wait outside my study for me to come apologize, even when she was wrong. But that child was gone, replaced by someone who had tried to orchestrate my erasure. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice thin. "You're just cutting me out? You cut yourself out." I said, "I'm simply acknowledging the reality you created." She stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You'll die alone, and when you do, no one will be there to clean up the mess." I looked at her, and something inside me, something soft and sorrowful, finally let go. "I've already been alone for years," I said, "but at least now I'm not pretending otherwise." She left without another word. The door closed behind her, and the room fell quiet again, but it was not an empty silence. It was a full one, a final one. Malcolm exhaled and began packing the documents. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. I was. For the first time in a long time, I was more than okay. I had drawn a line, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in clarity. I had taken back what had always been mine, my life, my choices, my voice, and no one would silence me again. The days after that final meeting passed with a strange and quiet clarity, as if the world had been rearranged into something simpler, less entangled. There were no more voicemails from Christine, no sudden letters, no visitors with clipboards or false concern. My phone rang less, but when it did, it was Malcolm checking in, or the bank confirming that all authorizations had been restricted to my sole control, or the local pharmacist reminding me my prescriptions were ready for pickup. It wasn't a loud life, but it was mine, and it no longer carried the creeping sense of someone else's fingers rifling through the drawers of my existence. I began to find small comforts in the things I'd always neglected. Sunlight across the hardwood in the late afternoon, the smell of brewed coffee left to steep a little longer than it should, the sound of the radio playing music I'd forgotten I loved. I walked more, a few blocks at a time, always with the cane, but never with fear. I spoke to neighbors I'd once nodded to but never really known. I even began attending a weekly book circle at the library, where most people were closer to my age and had also weathered the quiet grief of being slowly ignored by the very families they built. In April, I took the final step. I sold the house, not out of necessity but out of choice, a symbolic gesture as much as a practical one. It was the house where Helen and I had made a life, raised a daughter, hosted Thanksgivings, argued about wallpaper colors, and danced slowly in the kitchen with the lights off. But it was also the house where I'd been diminished, managed, quietly plotted against. I didn't want to die in a place where the walls had been used as evidence against me. I found a small apartment on the edge of town, 2 rooms, modest, clean, with wide windows that let in the sunrise. The landlord was a woman named Clara, 72, who lived in the unit next door and brought me soup the first week without asking. "Not charity," she said, smiling. "Just good manners. That still counts for something, right?" I told her it did. I spent a quiet Sunday boxing up the last of Helen's things. I kept the letters we wrote each other, the handkerchief she always kept in her purse, a few photographs where her eyes were laughing. I donated her clothes, but I kept the shawl she wore in winter and hung it near the door, where I could reach for it when I missed the weight of her presence most. I let go of the rest, not because it didn't matter, but because I wanted the memories to live in my mind, not as relics of something preserved, but as something still alive inside me. The apartment was smaller, but I found I had more space, not physically, but emotionally, mentally. There was room again to think without intrusion, to speak without having to prove my lucidity. I changed my phone number. I sent no forwarding address. If Christine wanted to find me, she'd have to look harder than she ever had. But I suspected she wouldn't. People like her rarely chase what they cannot control. A month later, I received notice that the court had dismissed her petition entirely. Lack of evidence, independent medical evaluations contradict claim. That was the phrase. Formal, precise, final. Malcolm sent me a copy, and I framed the page. Not out of spite, but because it reminded me that even at 81, a man could still defend himself and win. And then, quietly, without warning, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, slightly hurried, slightly slanted. Christine. I opened it slowly, not knowing what I would feel. It was 3 paragraphs. She said she was sorry, not for what she'd done, but for how things turned out. She said she had only tried to be practical, that she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said she hoped, in time, I could forgive the strain, and that if I ever changed my mind about talking, I knew where to find her. There was no warmth, no request to meet, no acknowledgement of the damage. Just those sterile, polite syllables. Strain, forgive, practical. I folded the letter once, twice, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some silences deserve to remain untouched. Now the days move more gently. I still write in my journal every night. I still feed the birds in the morning and sit with a book in the sun when the weather allows. I still talk to Helen, sometimes aloud, sometimes in the quiet part of my heart that no one else can reach. I've grown used to the solitude. It no longer feels like punishment. It feels like preservation. And sometimes I wonder, had she never said those words at Thanksgiving, "You're too old to matter," would I have remained asleep in my life, dimmed down to a background figure in my own story? But she did say it, and she meant it, and I heard it. And it woke me, and for that, strange as it sounds, I am grateful. I did matter. I mattered enough to be plotted against. I mattered enough to fight, and I mattered enough, finally, to save myself.